Yes. Zoom and phone. Although I was at the office yesterday and downtown was kind of buzzing. I was
Oh
surprised.
wow, wow, yeah, it's surprising. Yeah, I mean, I guess with vaccinations and stuff, people are starting to feel a little bit safer, but it's still a small proportion.
Right.
Um, so
I think it's we're expecting probably by the end of the summer, things will be as normal as they probably will be through the rest of the year. We are still
right,
planning our conference though, so we've got a commercial space plant a transportation conference that we're planning with AST, and that'll be October November timeframe most likely.
okay. Yeah, I think I mean that's one of the challenges. It was the same last year. You know, you figured 6 months, everything will be fine, and I
Right.
think nobody predicted it would be a year. And we're in the same boat, right? I mean, there's a lot of things coming up. We're all assuming we're going to be traveling, but it's kind of scary to book right now because they could cancel tomorrow. And yeah, just to be on the safe side. I was supposed to be in Scotland last June, and then they were supposed to be this June, and they think they might cancel it, but they haven't told us yet. And so it's like, chicken and egg. Do you book the flight or do you wait for the conference? Do you? And so,
Right.
but
Yeah. I know we're kind of struggling with the same thing. My folks actually just got their vaccines, so now they're eager to see the grandkids.
yeah, well, that's good. That's been a hard. I think that's been hard on kids and grandparents alike. We've been kind of lucky because we've been able to have the kids come home and instead of being at school, they're a bit older and uh, it just makes life in the house a little bit. The kid, my daughter isn't on her own, right? She's driving herself and us nuts. She's able to hang out with her brother and stuff. So,
Yeah, that's
but
good.
so people are slowly dribbling in. Like I said, I think we had 60, 70 people registered last I checked, and we sent out a reminder, so hopefully they will remember.
Yeah, no
So
problem.
maybe,
I'm happy
yeah,
to.
well, yeah, just some mix. We'll give it a couple of minutes, and then I'll get started. And I think what I'll do is I'll switch to the main screen, and if you want to share your first slide, then I'll do the introduction, with your first slide as a backdrop. If that's okay with you.
Okay, you ready to go ahead and start now?
I'll stop sharing. Yeah,
Okay.
great, thank you.
Mhm.
So I'll just another minute, and we'll see how it works. Our sponsor's not here. Arturo has not been joining us lately. Do you know Arturo Machuca,
I
Karina?
do. He's
Yeah,
probably heard most of the spiel before, so.
yeah, but he's still duty bound. I'll send
Mhm.
him the recording. He's duty bound to be here. Arturo and I work a lot together. He's a good guy.
Yeah, he's great. I'm sure they're really excited about Axiom coming. All of you guys.
Yeah, and Matt Ondler seems to be. It's like it's like can't turn on a conference anywhere without seeing Matt talking about the power of Axiom and stuff. So he's been really good. He's been quite accessible, which has been great.
It's really exciting what they're doing. I'll touch on that at the
Good.
end here.
Yeah, we had an interesting. So JP Morgan does this annual roundtable. It's usually a dinner. This is only the second. Last year it was a dinner, and so we had Jim Bridenstine
Hmm.
and a few folks on the. So the panelists included Jim, but there was also the audience was a bunch of invited folks, including the Axiom guys. So it's an interesting new world we're moving into, which I think is really good for you and the CSF actually. I
It
think,
is. It's absolutely fascinating.
yeah. All right. Well, let me just, in the interest of time, get started. So we're up at 30 folks now, and there'll be more coming in. Good evening, everyone. Welcome, as usual, to our Houston Spaceport lecture. It's been a while since I've spoken with you, but it's been an interesting start to 2021. So we're a little bit later than usual, but we are lucky to get our speaker tonight. She's a very busy lady, and so that's good. And I just wanted to make you aware of our next speaker. I have put in we haven't sent it out in the email, but it's on LinkedIn and stuff, is we have the president of the Canadian Space Agency, Lisa Campbell, and she'll be speaking on April 15th at the same time, the same format. So we like to do one speaker at a time. So once we the next few days or maybe next week, I will start sending out that information. And that's a kind of smaller program for this semester than usual, but I'm sure you can understand. I hope you all came through the freeze safe and well, and that you're again continue to stay safe through these pandemic times that we've got. I'm sure there's going to be a whole bunch of dystopian novels coming out about all of this sometime in the future. So what I'd like to do before I introduce tonight's speaker, just a little bit of the ground rules. So Karina has kindly offered to sort of respond to questions on the fly rather than waiting to the end. I have a couple of questions already, and the tone of those questions I think are better suited to the end. So I'll leave those in the Q&A. Please put your question in the Q&A. And during the interactive thing, during the interactive part of this, during the talk, if you just use the raise your hand feature, which is at the bottom, I will try and monitor that. And unless you have any objections, let me just do this. I'll assume that if you type it in the Q&A, other than the two that are there already, I will read your question for you. But if you'd like to engage directly with Karina, then I will just raise your hand and I will unmute you so you can ask your question. So hopefully that will work, and hopefully everyone's so familiar with Zoom nowadays that it's second nature. So let's do it that way, because again, I think that conversation is important. And then we'll also have a short Q&A at the end where we can get to some of the kind of broader issues as well. Okay, so really happy when I saw that there was a new president of CSF. I started immediately thinking about talks, and when I found out it was Karina Drees, I thought it made me even more keen. I haven't met Karina, not in person, just tonight, but I'm familiar with some of her work when she was at Mojave and so on. So it's a great honor for us to have Karina here. And so let me just give you a little bit of an introduction to her. So Karina is the current president of the Commercial Spaceflight Federation, which basically represents a lot of the commercial entities. There's 85 member companies, and their goal is to advance the capabilities of the United States in aerospace and to inspire the next generation of engineers and scientists. And so Karina is responsible for the strategic vision of the organization, and of course manages the priorities of the industry and pursues and works to promote these national policy priorities that are coming out of the industry. Prior to this position, Karina was the CEO and general manager of Mojave Air Spaceport, where there's an awful lot of activity that you may have seen in the news every so often. And while there, she was responsible for leading the implementation of strategic initiatives for the benefit of the companies operating at the spaceport, the Air and Spaceport, as well as the broader industry. She has a Bachelor of Science from Arizona State University and an MBA from MIT Sloan School of Management. She serves as the Vice Chair of the FAA's Commercial Space Transportation Advisory Committee, and also as an advisor to Voyager Space Holdings. So an impressive pedigree, really a great person to be leading a great organization. And with that, Karina, I will pass it over to you. And thank you for being part of our program here.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much for the kind invitation. It really is my pleasure to speak to this group tonight. It was an opportunity for me to put something together that was sort of like an update to the industry and what the outlook, what I think the outlook is for the industry as well. So as David mentioned, I know you guys don't want to hear me talk for, solid 30 minutes or so. So please do ask questions if things come up during the presentation that I can help clarify. There are a couple of questions in the queue, as David mentioned, and I think I'm going to touch on those a little bit, but happy to clarify toward the end of the presentation. So as David mentioned, I'm the president of Commercial Spaceflight Federation. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about, I kind of called this the Expanse 2021 for any sci-fi geeks out there like myself. that appreciate this show in particular, and how interesting it is to think about how this generation that we're in right now is sort of the start to this idea of expanding beyond Earth. So I think it's really exciting, some of the technological advancements that have been made in the commercial space industry over the past couple of years, and especially very recently. And I'll touch on some of the milestones that to me are pretty significant milestones to really continue this effort in space. So a little bit about the Commercial Spaceflight Federation. This is our mission statement, which I won't read to you, but essentially what we are is we're the trade association in Washington, D.C. that represents the interest of the commercial space industry. It kind of started out initially as a real focus on launch, on space flight, and specifically human space flight. That was the original intent, but it's really evolved since then to include launch companies, satellite companies, spaceports, professional service companies, a lot of different organizations now that have an interest in where this industry is headed. So what we do is essentially advocate for the industry and for those companies when it comes to things like legislation, sensible regulation, things that will help the industry advance to the next stage. So that's essentially what CSF is. And I mentioned some of these sectors of the industry. One of the questions that I was going to touch on here is what's kind of the plan for CSF going forward. And we are, really focusing on specific priority areas for each of these segments to ensure that we are covering the interests of the entire industry, and that it's not, strictly about launch and human spaceflight. Because all of these really kind of work together. I mean, this is really what makes up the commercial space industry. And when you think about commercial space, it's a little bit different from what we consider the traditional space companies that are typically funded by government programs, strictly government programs. So commercial space is not to say that they can't receive some government funding, but they're largely commercially funded, or they have an offering to the commercial sector to be able to launch goods into space. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the successes in the industry and what got us to this point, in my opinion. Let me just check the questions. There's something that came in. I'm curious about what's the view of these companies and space agencies around the world about any regulations or agreements in regards to who explores space. That's an interesting, that's definitely an interesting question. Do you envision an era where space agencies need permission to land on a comet or asteroid? These are really interesting questions, and a dialogue that's kind of been going on for quite some time. Even when we talk about things like space situational awareness, and surprisingly in the US, there are a lot of different organizations, even within the US today, that have an interest in space situational awareness, but no one real owner of it. And there is some concern about what would happen, or what will happen, if any one international agency develops their own requirements to something like that. And then is there an expectation that everyone else sort of needs to follow along? So it's definitely an interesting conversation. Same thing with things like ownership of space assets. So companies like Planetary Resources that started up quite some time ago with the intent of landing robots essentially on asteroids to mine them, and what real ownership stake do they have? So there are very interesting questions. I don't really have answers to your questions because the discussions, I think, will be ongoing for quite some time in those areas. But it's a very fascinating conversation, and something that I'll just mention briefly. So after I did my master's degree, I did the summer program at International Space University. I was in Beijing, China at the time. And the team project that I worked on was space traffic management. And that was in 2007. So that gives you an idea of how long it's been that we've been having those conversations and no real resolution to it. So just to touch on what I see as the major milestones, what has gotten us to this point. So The first one sort of being the first space tourist. This was a huge deal to be able to take a paying passenger up to the International Space Station, and that was Dennis Tito back in 2001. And I think that inspired a lot of interest in this possibility of more expansion in space and bringing space more to the sort of the regular person, or maybe the regular millionaire at the time. But it was an opportunity, I think, to really think about what space could be as an economy, really, for the commercial sector. So shortly before that, the X Prize, Peter Diamandis announced the X Prize, which was for a $10 million prize for the first commercially funded vehicle to launch into space. And that was a program, it took about 8 years before it was won. Scale Composites out in Mojave actually built and launched Spaceship One in 2004. And that really inspired so much, to really think about the possibility of common citizens going into space. Also in 2004, Mojave got its spaceport license. So that was part of the reason that I was so attracted to Mojave, is because of the fact that it really evolved into a spaceport rather than, a facility that aspired to attract the business. We were sort of forced to get that spaceport license, because otherwise Spaceship One wouldn't be able to fly. So that was a really interesting time for Mojave. And I think another milestone is the creation of the Iss National Lab, the ability to be able to send a commercial payload up on the ISS and do things like research and development. That's NASA announced a week or so ago that they're going to start essentially charging more for research, or just accessing the ISS. It's kind of unclear what that means, if it's sort of across the board or if it's more for like truly commercial purposes. But regardless, I think the starting this national lab in 2005 was a pretty interesting milestone for space. And then what's happened in the past 10 years to me is really the most exciting. So thinking about the first commercial cargo to ISS, and that was a Dragon capsule back in, I think it was May 2012, right before I moved out to Mojave. That was a huge day for space and commercial space, and really for the country. And then you go on to when CubeSats really started becoming popular in 2013. That wasn't the first one that was launched, but that was when it really became common as a commercial enterprise, the CubeSat companies. The first tool that was printed on the International Space Station in 2014. So this is why I call this talk The Expanse, because I really think this is where we're headed at some point in the near future, when you think about the capabilities of what we're doing in space itself. 2016 was reusability. That's when the first boosters actually came to land during a SpaceX launch, which is incredibly significant. 2018 was the Spaceship Two flight to space. Again, a significant milestone, thinking about the space tourism aspect and potentially point-to-point transportation down the road. 2019, the first 3D bioprinter on the space station, which has the ability, when you think in the future about being able to grow human organs in microgravity. So that was another interesting milestone. And then, of course, just last year, commercial crew. So this was the SpaceX launch of the astronauts to the space station. And that commercial crew program had been ongoing for a couple of years. And this was when we actually see it come to fruition. So before 2020, the US did not have a capability of sending astronauts to the ISS since 2011. And when we go back to the ISS, we go on a commercial vehicle. So it really is a significant achievement for the industry. Another interesting bit of information is the growth in licensed launches over the last 5 years. So, we'll continue to see this fluctuate year to year, but the trend is definitely climbing, and there's no doubt about where we're headed, the trajectory that we're headed. So these are, again, licensed launches. So licensed means FAA-AST has to give permission to these individual launch companies to be able to launch their rockets. So that's what a licensed launch is, versus like a Department of Defense launch, or in some cases a NASA launch. So these are license launches, which is definitely headed up. And then, as I mentioned, the milestone of the SpaceX launch to the International Space Station with Bob and Doug, the NASA astronauts, and the partnership that SpaceX has really developed with NASA, as well as a lot of the other commercial companies that have come on board throughout the years, like Blue Origin and Virgin Orbit and Rocket Lab. I'll mention a couple of these again as well. But so this is really what I've seen as the significant milestones. And I was often asked, especially as a business school student in 2005, 2006, and my classmates that would ask me, "What do you want to do out of grad school?" I would say, "I want to go work in the commercial space industry." And they're like, "You want to go work in commercial real estate? What is that?" And nobody knew what that was because it really didn't exist yet. There were very few companies that were even getting started. And everyone thought I was crazy. Being an MBA student, you think about going to work for, Goldman Sachs or McKinsey or something like that. That's what every MBA does. So people really thought I was crazy for pursuing this. And I'm really glad that I stuck with it. I did my internship between my 2 years at the X Prize Foundation and slept on somebody's floor for the summer just to be able to work there for free. So it was just such a fascinating time to get into the industry. And now we're seeing significant investment. We're seeing a lot of exits, meaning companies are going public or being bought out. We're seeing increased demand across the board for this industry because it really has become a significant economic driver. So Bryce is a phenomenal organization when it comes to data. If anyone's ever kind of wondering what's going on in the industry, Bryce has really good information out there. And this was their study that they did, a pretty thorough study in 2019, looking at the global space economy, which I think is projected to be something ridiculously higher than this in even the next couple of years. But you see that it really has become a pretty significant, sizable industry, just looking at the total global space economy and what that really means. So I think today it's pretty common knowledge that you can't function as an American anyway without accessing space probably every day. When you think about your TV or your cell phones or something like that, 5 years ago, people didn't understand that. that they were accessing space pretty regularly. But I think it's pretty common knowledge today that there is so much activity already going on in space.
So Karina, are you willing to ask a question about your International Space University
Absolutely.
experience? Robert, I'm going to unmute you. Robert just completed the Southern Hemisphere program. So he's all jazzed up about ISU and stuff. And so let me, Robert, you are now free to speak, I believe.
Thank you, David. I hope
there you go. Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Karina, it's great to meet you and congratulations on your new role. So my question was, based on your incredible experience at ISU in China, how do you think you can take those learnings now to your new role to have the CSF be a more international organization with a wider membership? What is your vision for that?
So that's a great question. And we have actually a lot of organizations that ask that question about whether they can get involved. And, for a short period of time, I think we had some international members. The challenge that we have, and this is, one of the other questions about how do we intend to grow CSF, we'd love to be able to carve out a sector somehow that does allow some international participation. The challenge that we have, quite frankly, is, what we do is advocate for things like policy, which is like legislation, things like getting involved with shaping the NASA budget. And that just inherently speaks to US companies for that reason, because it's all US based. So it's US legislation, it's the federal budget in a lot of cases for some of these companies. And that's really the challenge. Like we would love to have more international participation on some level, but they won't get the same kind of value that a lot of the US companies get for that reason. Same thing with regulation. One of the interesting things when we talk about international, either partnerships or just ways to expand internationally, is the idea of launching internationally, launching American rockets internationally. So this is a conversation that continues within FAA-AST. When we think about dual licensing, for example, with being able to launch Rocket Lab, might want to launch from the US, but they're also launching from New Zealand. Well, even to launch from New Zealand, they still have to get a license from FAA-AST to be able to launch in a foreign country. So they still fall under the regulatory regime of AST, even if they're conducting business, that type of business outside of the US. So I do see opportunities to gain more international partners, members somehow in CSF. But I think it will have to really be focused and tailored toward what's the value to them for that reason.
So Karina, I think that the questions are coming in, and they tend to be more general, but I think you sound like you're happy to sort of answer them in the flow. It's not interrupting the flow of your talk, is it? Or
not at all. This is
okay.
great. So this is some of the area that I wanted to focus on. Well,
great. Well, I'm glad the questions are really coming. I'll still save a couple of others towards the end, but also Arturo finally showed up. Hey, Arturo, and he's welcoming you to Houston and showing his appreciation. So, so Colin, I'm going to let you speak. So, Colin George works at NASA. He is about to graduate from our professional master's program here at Rice. And Colin, the floor is yours. I believe you should be able to speak now.
All right, thanks for that, Dr. Alexander. So my question is, how do you think the commercial sector expands beyond low Earth orbit?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a huge push in the last couple of years for this going back to the moon mission, so the Artemis program. And Artemis is, sort of meant to be the sister program to Apollo. And the human landing system of a portion of Artemis really is commercially focused. So this is where NASA is really shining in their public-private partnerships. When you think about the abilities that the commercial space sector has to launch and land equipment and people at some point on the moon. So it's definitely happening. NASA has a real focus on Moon and Mars at the moment. So I do think that we'll see a lot more attention in the sort of the expansion beyond ISS in the near future. From what we can tell, Artemis is going to continue as is, and we're kind of waiting to see whether the Biden administration will want to make any changes to this part of what NASA's working on. But so far, we're really encouraged to see that things will continue as is, because we've got a lot of companies, even CSF companies, that are already involved with that effort.
And a couple more, but just wise, Alicia, I think since your question is about the Houston Spaceport specifically, if you don't mind, I'd like to leave that to the end, because I think Arturo might be able to respond to that as well as Karina. So I'm not skipping you. I do see you, and I will get to you at the end. So since we're sort of jumping in here, why don't we go back to Bill's question? So Bill, I'm going to allow you to speak now so you can ask your question of Karina. Bill Spizziri.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, after I sent my question to you, I thought that there was a risk that I might sound like somebody who is, I don't know, not excited about and not liking commercial, all the commercial programs that are happening. I want to tell you, first of all, I've been waiting for this since the 1970s, okay? And it's not my question, but I keep wondering about what it feels like for you to be the lead character in a science fiction story, okay? So with that preface, sorry it was so long, I'm just gonna read my question here. And I was gonna read it and then it came on my screen. Okay, I think I can, I'm having a hard time seeing my question. Okay, I'm going to read my question. It seems some of the commercial spaceflight companies have been started by and continue to be largely run by single wealthy, dynamic individuals. Is that a risk? What if they are no longer in that position? Can the company still have the required vision and continue to be trusted as a partner for these long-term projects that spaceflight requires? Thank you.
That's a great question, and I don't take that at all as, you know, being skeptical or in any way anti-commercial. So here, this is kind of my take on it. I think that a lot of the folks that got involved back in the early mid 2000s, I think it was necessary because it was really tough to sell this idea of being able to build space equipment with a firm fixed price contract, which is what these companies advocate for. It's such a high dollar amount. So I think a lot of these folks had to take that risk in order to get us to a point where the industry is taken seriously. In Mojave, I don't know if I should say this, but it was kind of the joke in Mojave. We had Virgin Galactic, and then we had the Paul Allen Stratolaunch program, and both of those hangars were on our taxiway B. Anybody who knows airports knows that taxiways are labeled with a letter, so taxiway Bravo. And my predecessor had nicknamed it Taxiway Billionaire. For that reason, because we had two of those space companies in Mojave that set up shop. But I think that was necessary to get us going. But is it a risk today? I definitely don't think so, because there are so many more companies now that are entering the industry. Plus Virgin Galactic actually went public, so they can't really say that they're owned by a billionaire anymore. They're kind of owned by the public market now. And then you've got Rocket Lab that started up, Relativity Space that started up. I'm just focusing on launch companies. Atlas Space is another one, Spin Launch. So all of these are now being funded by venture capital or private equity in some cases. Or just a lot of folks that are getting started on their own. ABL Systems is another launch company, a propulsion company that just kind of started out on their own and then ended up getting some investment. I'm probably forgetting a couple, but there are several now in the industry that are operating without that billionaire backer. So I think it's really fascinating. Maston Space Systems, you know, they're a really scrappy small company in Mojave that are doing some pretty fascinating things as well. And they didn't have that opportunity right from the start. So they ended up really bootstrapping that company and have had some really good successes. They're now one of the CLIPS recipients for the lunar lander. So I think that risk is reduced significantly. I can't say that it's completely eliminated, but I absolutely think it's reduced significantly. So that's, can a company still have the required vision and continue to be trusted as a partner for the long-term projects that spaceflight requires? I do think so. And I think when I mentioned a minute ago that commercial companies are advocating for things like firm fixed price contracts, that's what really helps keep things competitive within the marketplace. What NASA would traditionally do, and DoD would traditionally do for that matter, they award things on a cost plus basis, which essentially means companies can keep coming back to the well. We're not finished yet, we need to extend this, and things, you know, there's really no incentive for those companies to finish those programs on time and on budget. Whereas, you know, I think that focus on firm fixed price contracts really keeps things competitive in the marketplace. So I think that's really going to help narrow down some of these options, these opportunities, and really focus on what are the best technologies out there.
Okay, so you may not get to the end of your presentation, Karina, because I think the questions are coming in. I think they're really interesting questions. So John, I do see your hand up, but I think Celsa had a question in the Q&A just prior to that. So I'll go to Celsa, then John, and then Sai. So Celsa, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. You should be able to speak now.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Alexander. My question is in regards to NASA's budget. You were mentioning that the commercial participation is increasing. Do you think that participation will get NASA a good excuse to get their budget increased, or much participation will make it look like, oh, NASA is fine, they don't need any more increase in their funding, they will deal with commercial collaboration? What's your take on NASA's budget? Thank you.
I think the success of the industry, especially these past couple of years, has put a lot more attention on NASA. So Congress is paying a lot more attention now. Um, the Discovery Channel, I think it was, did they partnered with, I don't quote me on this, but it was something, there was a partnership somehow between the Discovery Channel and SpaceX slash NASA with the crewed flight, the mission flight to ISS. And that got more views than anything has in recent past, than the Super Bowl or anything else. So it's pretty clear that there's public interest in space again. And I think that is going to push a lot more attention to things like the NASA budget. I mentioned just a second ago, the firm fixed price contracts. I think that there's an opportunity to kind of do both simultaneously. One, to increase the budget, which is absolutely necessary, and for so many reasons. But two, to really focus in on some of those sectors that are going to be beneficial ultimately to the U.S. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there right now. I don't see it going down anytime soon. Jim Bridenstine, I think he's a Rice alum, right?
Yes.
He did a phenomenal job at NASA, and he was incredibly supportive of commercial space as well. So I think he really pushed to help set NASA up for success. And I actually think that having come from politics was beneficial in this case, because that's a huge part of the job, is advocating for a budget increase. And he was really successful doing that. So hopefully that somewhat answers your question.
Okay, so I see there's also people putting their questions in the chat, so I'm having to bounce around 3 different screens. If you could put your questions in the Q&A, that would kind of help. Or if you just want to raise your hand, like so John Barr, you had your hand up for a little while, so I'm going to give you the microphone to ask your question, John.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can.
My question builds on the previous question, which was, I was hoping you could talk a little bit about the politics of this. The Biden administration, I don't believe they've announced a director of NASA yet, which is a little surprising to me. And is this support or this partnership between NASA and the federal government and commercial space, is this a rare instance perhaps of bipartisanship in Washington? What do you think about that?
I completely agree. So NASA has been traditionally very bipartisan. So regardless of which administration is in the White House, or which side controls Congress, I think space has been one of those things that has really enjoyed a lot of bipartisan cooperation. So I see you're absolutely right. They haven't announced a NASA administrator yet. They typically do things in a certain order, and what we think is happening is the fact that President Biden has elevated the head of the Office of Science and Technology Policy as a cabinet level position, which we see as a very encouraging sign, not only for space, but for technology, for things like climate change and everything else. So we think what's happening is that's going to take place first, and then NASA administrator will probably come shortly after that. Possibly, they could announce their candidate, pretty much any time, or their nominee pretty much any time. So they haven't really discussed anything about a space policy yet. One of the things the Trump administration did is they resurrected the National Space Council, and that was an opportunity for government to meet specifically about space. That's really what inspired the Space Force to start a couple of years ago as well. But the National Space Council was also an opportunity for the commercial sector to get involved. I should say the private sector to get involved. So it's commercial and the traditional government partners that formed a user advisory group. And I think that was really beneficial to the National Space Council and just talking about all of the capabilities. It's not clear whether that will continue, and if it does, in what capacity. So we're all kind of waiting to see what will happen there. But I do think it's really encouraging, and I agree that space has been a pretty bipartisan topic across the board.
So thank you for that. We're going to go to Sai, then Mark, who seems to be using all of my windows to ask the same question. Mark, I'll tell you who Mark is when I introduce him in a second. But we're going to go to Sai, and then Mark, and then Erin. And Sai is again, he's going to be graduating from our professional masters program this semester. So Sai, you have the microphone.
Thank you, Dr. Alexander. So my question is, who is allowed to build and invent, and how are intellectual property rights managed in space?
That's a great question, and I don't know that I will be able to answer that entirely. I can tell you that typically when a government contract is awarded, if there's not an opportunity to negotiate ownership rights of whatever's developed, it's typically understood that whoever's funding the technology would own the IP. So in a lot of cases, what would happen, let's just take NASA, for example. Companies would get a contract under NASA. NASA owns that technology once it's developed because they've funded it, but there's an opportunity usually for that company to come back and directly license it from NASA in some of those cases. That's not always the case. I think probably some organizations are a little bit more strict than others, but that is very typical of a kind of an ownership structure.
Okay, so Mark is relatively recently retired from NASA, and he's now at the Space Institute at Rice as our Associate Director for Special Projects, and he's been waving his hand like a madman. Mark.
So I haven't been waving. I've been just sitting here calmly.
Anyway, Mark, the floor is yours, man.
All right, so I've been studying your wheel since that's the slide that's up there, and I was curious about where does the aspirational ventures of like Blue Origin and SpaceX show up in this wheel? Because there's a lot of investment there, and it's hard to tell where it is in this big thing.
Right. So
maybe it's too small to see. Is that what you think? Is that maybe the answer?
So this really is just representative of the entire economy, not so much the investment. I think Bryce has a separate one on just the investment, but I can tell you that when you look at especially using older data. So if you look at like 2017-18 information and you were to see just strictly the investment in the industry, you would see a significant chunk of that coming from Jeff Bezos himself into Blue Origin. I don't remember what those exact numbers are off the top of my head anymore, but I think this is just more representative of the entire economy and not so much on the investment that's coming into it, if that makes sense. I wish I had that slide though, because that's significant as well when you just look at the amount of investment coming into the industry.
Yeah, so it's kind of a mix of revenue and government sponsorship. Is that sort of what this wheel is?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, Bryce does do the VC investment and breaks it down by country and all sorts of things. So there's a lot going on there. I think I'm remembering that Jeff Bezos used to take out something like $1 billion a year out of Amazon, and he spent half of it on cost of living and half of it on Blue Origin. But I think he's upped that Blue Origin component in recent years. So there's a lot going on there. I am getting requests that we let you go on with your presentation.
Okay.
I'm actually enjoying the conversation myself, but I did promise Erin her question. So why don't you can keep putting in your questions, but why don't we let Erin ask her question, and then Karina, you can move ahead, and we'll come back to a kind of a Q&A. I think it's been fascinating, so I hate to disrupt it, but I think people are curious to see what else you have to say. So Erin, let me give you the mic. 1 second. Okay, you should be able to speak now. Erin? Did we lose you, Erin? Okay, well maybe we'll come back to that, and we'll start with Erin if maybe she's just stepped out for a second.
Okay. So
Okay, so yeah, over to you again, Karina. Sorry about that.
okay, great, no problem. So this is another kind of significant milestone in terms of investment is the mergers and acquisitions and IPOs. So if anybody's kind of been seeing what's going on in the news, Virgin Galactic went public, oh my gosh, it was a couple of years ago now. Stratolaunch was acquired by a private equity company. You've had other companies that are starting up sort of holding companies or private equity companies that are starting to really focus on commercial technologies. We've had several companies now, just even in the past couple of months, that are announcing their public offerings coming up. So I think this is really interesting, and it's really also kind of indicative of the interest that investors have in the industry. This is pretty new, and I would say just some of the significant achievements and that kind of that milestone timeline that I showed you a minute ago, I think is the reason we're now looking at so much attention on things like investment and exits. Let's see. So the expanding industry, and this is kind of the last sort of section that I wanted to talk about. So, and the reason that I suggested to David that we call this the expanse, because this is to me what is like now the most fascinating thing about the industry is looking at what's next. You know, we've come a long way. There are a lot of questions up front about, is this industry really necessary? I think we're past that. I think it's pretty common knowledge to think about, we use space on a daily basis. And we have a lot better launch technologies today, thanks to the commercial sector, than we had just a couple of years ago. So where are we headed next? The launch and reusability piece is kind of the first step. This is how I see it. We've got a lot more launch companies coming online, and I've already named several of them already. And the idea of reusability, I think, is extremely fascinating. And it's not so much, in my opinion, it's not so much the fact that it's a cost-saving opportunity, although that is extremely significant, the fact that we don't have to throw away all this equipment just from using it one time. But there's an analogy that I heard, I think it was Morgan Stanley, when they talk about Otis Elevator back in, you know, whenever Otis Elevator started the elevator business. And nobody could figure out, why do we need an elevator? I'll just take the stairs, you know. And you have this kind of wonder and sort of amazement about the technology, but you can't really get your mind around, why is it beneficial? And today, cities are designed around a central elevator shaft. We wouldn't think anything else. You know, you couldn't imagine not having skyscrapers in major cities and just being able to build out into suburbia forever. So I think, to me, when I think about reusability, I like that analogy the most, because this is sort of the opportunity to think about, how do we access space more efficiently? And when we think about expanding into space, we think about the elevator for that reason. So that to me is interesting. Reusability, I put Virgin Orbit in here as well, because they have a really interesting concept where they use essentially an off-the-shelf 747 that they've modified to be able to put a pylon under the wing where a fifth engine could potentially go on a 747. And they have that rocket right under the wing. So the airplane itself is essentially the first stage of the rocket, and obviously reusable. I threw this in there as well because I think this is another interesting piece when we think about where we headed next, this idea of human-tended payloads. So, you know, the wording, like, it's not real catchy maybe, but basically all it means is sending up researchers on a suborbital flight to be able to conduct research in flight, rather than just send the research itself and then waiting to see the results when it comes back down. So there's a lot more attention on this now as well. And I think there will be going forward. I just wanted to touch on that a little bit. The in-space manufacturing, I think, is really fascinating as well. So this is one of NASA's logos about the in-space manufacturing. Their little tagline is "Make it, don't take it." The idea of developing technologies that will process and processes that to enable that on-demand manufacturing, which I think is really interesting. There are a number of companies now involved with this. So you know, the couple of the the key focus areas here. I blocked my screen. The 3D printing on the space station, and I mentioned that in the milestone chart as well. That just blows my mind. The fact that they can actually print something, send the information up from the ground and have the astronauts actually print on the space station, I think is just absolutely fascinating. It blows my mind. And this idea of additive manufacturing, I'm going to go through just a couple of quick things. And I left myself some notes because a lot of the stuff is brand new. And I want to make sure that I don't really, butcher it. So this is one of the projects that Made in Space very recently launched. This is called the Industrial Crystal Facility, or ICF, which is designed to explore the growth and formulation of inorganic, large single crystals and other exotic materials in microgravity with size and quantity relevant for terrestrial use. This is a fairly new initiative from Made in Space, which is now under Redwire. So the intent of this is to focus on advanced materials engineering and expand utilization of the ISS into new product areas that have not been previously investigated. So this is just one of their initiatives. And then another one, which I think is incredibly fascinating. I think this is an image of Archinaut, which is another Made in Space program, but this is the idea of the sort of the next generation in space manufacturing. And the idea is they have the ability to essentially send up a 3D printer, along with your satellite to be able to print your solar panels, because that's part of the challenge that you have on the ground is folding up the solar panels to be able to stick that on a rocket and launch it into space. And this really cuts down on that challenge that the engineers have and cuts down on the weight as well. So I think this is another really interesting technology. In space research and development, this is, these images are a company called TechShot. So the first one here is a medical X-ray machine for mice in space. And it's in use. It's been used to test drug experiments for bone loss and muscle wasting diseases as well, which affect a lot of people on Earth. And astronauts on long duration missions also risk bone and muscle loss. So this is the bioengineering company. The other image here is they've labeled the BFF. It's the Biofabrication Facility. And it is a partnership with Nscript and TechShot to manufacture Earth-based industrial 3D printers in order to develop this BFF, which has been successful in printing cardiac muscle, nerve and vascular cells, and knee cartilage. The ultimate goal is to be able to replace tissue for people on Earth. So being able to do this research in a microgravity environment is what's enabling them to make these achievements. And then another one I find pretty interesting is what I've labeled here as space nutrition. So this is another partnership between TechShot and Tupperware to develop new devices to grow crops in space. And if you're again like the sci-fi, not like me, if you like the movie Martian, The Martian, I think that's what it was, the one with Matt Damon. And the reason that he got a little crazy toward the end is because he was essentially affected by scurvy because he had no vitamin C. Just eating potatoes all day long. So this is an opportunity to really expand the nutrition for people living in space as well. So this is another thing that I find pretty fascinating in just looking at developments in space. And then of course, Axiom, which somebody asked about what's going on at the Houston Spaceport. Well, this will be going on at the Houston Spaceport coming up. So Axiom is a privately funded company that is essentially building their own space station. So they're using it as a commercial laboratory and residential infrastructure in space that will serve as a home to microgravity experiments and critical space environment materials testing and private and professional astronauts as well. So it'll orbit roughly the same orbit as the ISS. And the idea is be able to have a permanent setup for these types of experiments and for people to go back and forth into space. And I think that's all I had. So if anyone had any other questions on that type of stuff, I'm happy to answer. Otherwise, if we want to get back into the regular Q&A. So that's why I labeled this talk The Expanse, because I really see, these companies are real. Like these things are happening today, and it's only going to continue growing. It will continue expanding, and this is why I say, like, I think we're in this first generation of this idea of expanding into the universe, and I think this is sort of the start of it. And I don't know, to me, it's absolutely fascinating. I love being involved in the industry. So I will just plan on taking questions for the last couple of minutes here.
Yeah, and let me do the applause for everyone, right? So I think you know, even just a couple of comments in the chat, fantastic insight into what's going on, really exciting, and I think your title was spot on. So let me, I promised Erin and Alicia, I know that Alicia is a spaceport, but you also touched on that. So let me, and Erin is on the phone, so she's having trouble, I think, with being able to use the mic. So she asked me to read her question to you, and I know you can see it yourself, Karina, but do you see the commercial industries eventually outpacing government agencies in space exploration? Or do you see the commercial space industries mainly focusing in different areas and development than governments?
It's a good question. And I think what I would have to say initially is it depends. So, you know, where I think NASA, if NASA has any controversy at all with its budget, I think it's the fact that they really do want to be more of a research organization rather than kind of the comings and the goings. They really would like to spend more of their money on research. And this is where I think commercial plays a much greater role. When you think about taking that aspect off of NASA's plate and letting NASA focus on the research, which I'm sure they would be happy to do. So I think, you know, to me, that's more when I think about where commercial space plays a role here, and whether it's whether they'll outpace government agencies in space exploration. Probably not, because I think government agencies have much more of an incentive for that long-term goal of, you know, what they're doing with exploration. But I think even with that exploration, there are so many opportunities to partner with commercial companies, and therefore commercial companies will play a much larger role. I can't remember how many companies were involved, even with the Perseverance landing several weeks ago, but several even of the CSF members have been involved in that. Arizona State University, you know, one of our contacts there, it was a private investigator for part of the mission. Maston contributed to the mission. I think Maiden Space contributed to the mission. There were a lot of commercial companies that contributed to that mission, which really was strictly exploratory. But that's a really good example of even a current partnership. But I don't think long-term they'll necessarily outpace when it comes to exploration. They will absolutely outpace when it comes to economic drivers.
So thank you. I was going to, Alicia had been waiting, I thought had been waiting patiently. She asked a question about the spaceport a way back. But and Erin says, thank you very much, by the way, for your answer. And I've unmuted Arturo, or maybe that was enough to send her away. But I think Alicia, I don't see in the participant list. So perhaps maybe between you and Arturo, we can just take a couple of minutes to say something. You've already mentioned Axiom, and just from a CSF perspective, what do you see in the spaceport side? And then hopefully Alicia can watch the recording later and get an answer to her question. And then Arturo, I've unmuted you, so perhaps you could follow Karina's comments with some of your own. That's okay. So Karina, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's absolutely fascinating what Axiom is doing, and I'll definitely let Arturo talk in more detail about Axiom. What I would say about spaceports in general is, you know, I think it's absolutely necessary. You're going to need, with all of these companies coming online, especially now, you're going to need several options for doing this, either space systems development, infrastructure development, or, you know, all the way up to launch. And the reason is, like, even to do a certain series of tests, you might require a certain type of facility that has certain protocols in place. If you intend to do any launch from that facility has to have a spaceport license. So I think there's a lot of reasons why a lot of spaceports want to get that early, because it takes a lot of time. In some cases, it takes several years to go through an environmental review in order to get the license. So I'll let Arturo talk in more detail about Houston specifically.
Well, thank you, Karina. First of all, I want to thank you for taking time to talk to us today. You made some great points, and I also want to share with you, as you will know, Commercial Spaceflight Federation has been instrumental in, in the development of the Houston Spaceport. We've been members of Commercial Spaceflight Federation. I think we go back all the way to 2012 when we were just beginning our plans, right? And it has been the Commercial Spaceflight Federation, without a question, a great source, for our, for the, the level, whatever level of success that we have achieved so far. Yes, to Axiom is what one of the biggest news that we have. Just last December, we made the announcement here in the city of Houston that Axiom has selected Houston to build their facility. And what we're talking about is it's just something that really goes, in my opinion, beyond everybody's expectations. The plans that they have to build this facility, just because of what they're gonna be doing, right, include not just manufacturing space, hangar space, but training astronaut waters. I mean, they have just the need for space and technology that it's just creating that very positive effect in the Houston community. Some people, tend to question the validity, right, of having a spaceport. And again, from my perspective, I always invite people to just to try to reason, to think about airports, and how airports back at the beginning of last century, right, did not exist. And I use Ellington Field as a great point of reference. Ellington Field is called Ellington Field because airport didn't exist when it was created back in 1917. So anyhow, with that said, right, the spaceport, the network of spaceport that is being created across the U.S. is nothing but great news. I believe that each segment of the space economy has a role to play, right? And as we continue to do, each one of us, the part that it corresponds, we will just, we will definitely, get out there, and we will continue this expanse, right? And again, our vision has been one that clearly recognizes that whatever happens out in space has a direct effect here in our daily lives, right? And I mean, I'm talking just the most basic part, jobs. The commercial space industry is creating a number of jobs that before we didn't have. By the way, the Axiom development came along with a fact that includes just about 1,000 employees, high paying jobs that again, will just be of great benefit to the people in the area. But again, thank you so much, Karina. I really appreciate your leadership, right? And we will continue looking forward to working with you. Thanks for taking time to talk to us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Arturo. Karina, we're at 8 o'clock. Do you have time to take a couple more questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
How's your time? And so, with apologies to the two Roberts for a second, I'm going to, I'd like to folks stay on the kind of industry side for a second, and then maybe again, if Karina's willing, we can come back to those other questions. So there's essentially 3 questions, or 2 questions wrapped up in 3 here. So let me ask Adam, or let me open the mic to Adam, who seems to have gone as well. I guess people have other commitments. So I don't see. Oh, there, Adam. My apologies. I see you. I was too far down. Adam, you now have the microphone if you would like to ask your question.
Hi, I am very interested in space travel and the possibility of trying to open up space to a greater audience of people, especially humanity. And one of the things I've always wondered is, and I think you kind of touched on this a little bit, is we can do a lot of things in space. We could produce things such as materials, tools, even food. And that has me thinking, what other types of research or in semi-industrial things can we do? I kind of typed this before, like, can we do robotics research up there, energy research up there? Another thing that's really fascinating to me is material. Well, you touched on materials research already, but things like that. Is there any possibility that we can have those types of industries develop in the future of commercial space flight?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And I absolutely see a lot of benefit to other industries. It sounds really corny, but there are a lot of commercial companies that are wanting to do things like product testing in microgravity. And, I mentioned a minute ago about NASA increasing their fees to access the ISS. And I think it's because of that demand in a lot of cases. So one of the makeup companies, I can't remember which one it is, might be L'Oreal or Revlon or something like that. They wanted to do microgravity research on their products. I think it was Adidas wanted to do research on their products for their sneakers. And it kind of, that list seems to be growing, at least that list of requests seems to be growing. And then I mentioned the human-tended research as well on suborbital flights. There are a lot of companies that are really wanting to get more involved in that for their own product development to be able to use here on Earth. So I do see that continuing to grow. The molecular composition, and I can't articulate this at all because it's way over my head. When you apply gravity to it, behaves completely differently. If you take that gravity away, there's so much opportunity for, things like, I already touched on the developing organs in space. What if there's a way for, to, have some sort of blindness correction in space? We're talking about products today, product development, but I think the opportunities are potentially endless. But there are a couple of things I think we have to perfect first. And this is sort of the starting point when we think about the companies that are in existence today. So yeah, I absolutely think there's opportunities there.
Thank you. And we have two questions on the same topic from Bianca and Anthony. And since Anthony's my student, I think I'll give Bianca the mic, even though Anthony has got a kind of second part to the story. So Bianca, would you like to ask your question, please?
Yes. I was wondering, because of course we have great projects about flying and develop cities in other planets or the moon. However, what about the space debris? Is there, any project or any commercial project to clean it? Because I know there is a lot unable.
Yes. Yeah. So I have a couple different answers for that. So there are essentially three things going on. So there are a couple of companies that are working on just a general cleanup plan. One of them is called Astroscale. I have a colleague that works here in their DC office, and that's kind of what their mission is debris removal, cleanup. There are companies that are actually trying to recycle some of the assets in space by building new habitats and that kind of thing with existing materials in space. And then there are companies that are seeing if they can use some of the assets in space as essentially feedstock to be able to create new things in space. So I think with those three things that are going on right now, definitely, I see that as a focus area for the industry here coming up.
And I mean, Anthony's follow-up, I don't know if you can see it, but I'm sorry, Anthony, I'll just do it here. I mean, do you foresee federal regulations sort of like requiring, well, I think, let me rephrase that because I know the answer, but does the federal government have regulations requiring companies to deorbit their spacecraft?
So that is going to be a topic I think we're going to start to see a lot more here coming up, because it is, in some cases, it's ambiguous who actually controls it. So I think we're going to start to see a lot more conversations about things like orbital debris, space situational awareness, and that kind of thing. So I don't have a direct answer for you yet, because I think a lot is pending at the moment.
Yeah, I think that applies a lot to these, particularly these new constellations. I mean, there is, you know, when I used to work at Lockheed, and when you propose a mission, you have to have a deorbit plan like 25 years out and so on, and that I think needs to be carried forward more clearly to some of these kind of smaller spacecraft and more rapid launches and replacements and so on. So it's an interesting conversation. Mark, I do see your hand up, but let me, Robert, one of the Roberts rephrased the question, and Robert, I'm going to open up to you to ask the industry question if you don't mind. I don't know if you have time for the other one, but let me find you on the list here. And Robert is another student in the professional master's program here who is going to be graduating this semester. Robert.
Hey there. So I think you might have already answered this, but what do you think the effect will be of NASA removing the subsidy on commercial upmass for ISS? I think the cost increase is something like 6x.
Yeah, in some cases it's even more. So I guess it sounds like, don't quote me on this because I have not talked directly with anyone at NASA on this topic, but it sounds like what's happening is they're applying that more to commercial testing rather than research. So most of the companies that are doing work on the National Lab right now or on the ISS are conducting research. When you think about the manufacturing piece, or they have a contract directly with NASA to do it. But I mentioned some of those commercial companies like the makeup company, for example. The focus on removing that subsidy appears to be more for those types of efforts rather than things that are truly research-based, or certainly things that NASA deploys. I think there's some there was some pushback within NASA on like the Tom Cruise movie, for example, that got a lot of publicity about the possibility of having a movie actually filmed on the space station. And I think that started to raise a lot of questions about whether NASA was helping to fund some of that. So I think that's what kind of inspired this to happen in the past week or so, maybe past 10 days. But it's kind of unclear because they weren't really specific in the rollout, but it seems to be that that's what was driving it.
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying. So Mark put his hand down. Mark, I've letting you talk. Did you have a question since your hand was up earlier, or did you?
Yeah. So my real question was more about. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind thumbnailing some of your specific initiatives or objectives. You know, other than just doing, being the leader to advocate for commercial sector to government. And is there anything that you're planning to do specifically to take the Commercial Space Federation in a new direction? I was wondering if you wouldn't mind thumbnailing, what your big ideas are for the CSF.
Yeah, I'll mention sort of one thing that I have not touched on yet, and it kind of speaks to a couple of different things that we've already talked about. Somebody had asked about whether there's any danger in having the billionaires fund the industry largely. One of the things that to me is remarkable about CSF is it's been kind of the hub for all things commercial space. And that's from anything from a billionaire-backed company all the way to a startup a company, you know, building CubeSats in their garage. And so I think where, you know, we've been so focused on policy and regulatory, because that's really what we've become really good at is understanding how to affect policy and regulation. But one of the things that I'm hoping to kind of fold into it is more attention to those startups. So for example, having, you know, opportunities for them to give pitches to either the community to develop partnerships, or to some of the other folks that might be more interested in investment, and trying to connect some of those organizations together, and really focus on what CSF can do to help get some of those technologies online more quickly than they might be able to just going through the traditional SBIR route that a lot of startups need to go through. So that's one initiative that I haven't really talked about yet that we're really hoping to pay some attention to in the near future.
Thank you. So I think we'll have one last question, and Arturo has a comment. So Robert Ion, I'm letting you speak now, Robert. So you're live.
Well, thank you so much, David. We wanted to know, for example, there's so much potential for demand in the US, so many schools and universities that if every one of them wanted to send a project to space, there wouldn't be enough spaceports and current rockets to be able to handle that. How can we get them all excited so we can increase the demand and that therefore increase the capacity that exists in the US?
So this is actually, you might be surprised to know how involved commercial space companies are in STEM. Even when I was out in Mojave, the companies that were out there were happy to give tours to high school students, or even grade school students in some cases. It was challenging for them because they have real hardware that they're building in real time, but they prioritize that. And I see that kind of across the board in this industry, is the fact that they're able to inspire the next generation, and even the third generation in some cases, of aspiring engineers, scientists, and maybe even astronauts to get involved in the industry. So I think the outreach from the commercial companies to the students is much greater than in a lot of other industries from what I've seen. Blue Origin as an example, because I have a first grader that I was hoping, you know, post-COVID to have his class participate in. But Blue Origin gives these postcards out to schools, basically anyone who asks for them. And the students can draw a picture on it, you know, write their address. It's essentially a postcard. Blue Origin will take that up in one of their flights, one of their suborbital flights, bring it back down, and then mail it back to the students and say, this postcard has gone to space. So there's those types of things I think that companies are doing today to get students a lot more involved and a lot more interested in the industry, and in exploration for that matter.
Great, thank you. So I think, I don't know, Karina, if you saw in the text, but one of our students, Robert, had a comment about the National Academy. So I thought maybe that would be just a separate thing if you wanted to answer that. But Arturo wanted to, I think, say something, and this, apart from my kind of final goodbye, I think this will be us done. But let me open up to Arturo. Arturo, you're on.
Thank you, David. Just a quick question, precisely connected to Robert, the student. I mean, not a question. I wanted to make a comment that I thought is so relevant. A couple of weeks back, we were having an industry meeting here at the Spaceport, right? And to me, it was so gratifying to see several students that started as interns just about a year and a half ago, working there at Intuitive Machines. And they've been working in the lunar lander. That they're working, some of them doing the solar panels, some of them working in propulsion. And the fact is, these students, young students, had the chance to get up in front of industry, right, and started talking about the opportunity that came to them. I guess based on NASA's move to create this program, right? And then, of course, for us, the luck to have Intuitive machines, be one of the recipients. There's students here that started as interns. They're just like I said, a year and a half ago, now are working full-time with Intuitive machines, and just I guess living the dream, in my opinion. It's really good. And so my I guess my recommendation would be for those interested in getting connected to the space industry, let's do it now. There's a number of opportunities that are opening up, and I think there's a lot more to come.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and actually the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation has their conference going on right now, today and tomorrow, and it's just fantastic, the level of interest. And now there's more outlets for students, with this growth of the commercial space side of things. So it increases the excitement, but also gives more opportunities in different parts. You don't have to be an engineer. You don't have to be a scientist. There's lots of things you can do with this new growing industry. And I think Karina, this has been absolutely fantastic. I think you can tell by not only the number of questions, but the enthusiasm of the questions. And I think from my perspective, the quality of the questions. So I really appreciate you again taking the time. I know you're very busy, and I know it's a little bit later where you are than here. But it's been fantastic. We'll have this will be recorded, or it is recorded, so we'll put that online. And yeah, anytime you like to come back, you know where to find us, and I really appreciate it. And like everyone, again, thank you for joining us. Again, our next one will be April 15, another president, different organization, and hopefully we'll see you back then. And again, keep your eye. You can check on what CSF is doing. They're online. They're doing all this great stuff. And so, thank you all for joining us. And Karina, again, thank you very much for your time. That was great.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure. I really appreciate the invitation.
And Arturo, always good to hear from you, man.
And thank you, David. Thank you, Karina, again. Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
All right. Bye-bye. Good night.